Change and transformation are not the same thing. With change management, we think about the technology and the process and the skill set required of people to be able to execute that new way within the change. In transformation, we go beyond that and we start to look at the fundamental behaviors and principles that people apply in their day-to-day work and how they perceive their environment around them. Because of that, the organizational skill set and behaviors are far more important within a transformational change. In today's talk, I'm going to talk about some of the challenges of this sort of behavioral approach and give a bit of a framework that will enable you to start thinking about how do you take your transformation forward and start to bring in the behaviors and mindset required for a new digital operating model. Change and transformation are different things. Within change management, we talk about the application of technology to a process, and it might mean there's process change, there might be skill set development required of the workforce, but fundamentally it doesn't change the behaviours and the attitudes of the workforce. Transformation goes beyond that. It starts to challenge the fundamental ways of working and behaviours in an organisation to optimise the opportunities that digital is presenting. Now, because of that, we have to think differently about change, differently about how we influence behaviours and how people need to adopt new ways of working as we start to move forward with our digital transformation. So in looking at that, we define this very clear vision and this clear idea of the behaviours and attributes we need as an organisation to optimise the opportunity that digital can present. We then start to need to look at the current behaviours and the current skill set of our employees and where they are today, because ultimately people are driven and they're shaped by the environment they're working in today. So if you're currently working in an environment where you've got a legacy 30-year-old system that's quite difficult to work through, people's behaviours and mindset will be influenced by that. And this is quite important because in a traditional change model, I think a lot of people talk about, well, we really need to talk to staff about their requirements and what they're trying to achieve. If your mindset is shaped by that legacy technology and that legacy way of working, your requirements are actually going to be exactly the same thing as you had 20 years ago. But with all of those problems fixed that people had. So actually what you're really going to end up with is a solution that the organisation required 5 years ago, not one that's going to take the organisation forward into the future. So it's quite important to understand the mindset of people before you embark on your transformational change, so that you don't make the mistakes of simply gathering requirements for something that you needed to fix your legacy system. Now, one way of looking at that, and it is quite a divisive way, I think, when you start to look at the challenges and the assumptions that come through, is looking at the different generations in the workforce. And I think a lot of people are using this sort of generational model as a way of designing their solutions for the future. And now we've got multiple generations in the workforce. What we actually start to see is we've got different skill sets and different attitudes and different motivations in the workforce that your change needs to cater for and needs to understand in the first place. We start with baby boomers, and you know, these are people that grew up 60s, 70s. They weren't digital natives. They, in fact, for the majority of them, they didn't even see a computer until they started in the workforce. All the way through to our Gen Z that are now completely digitally native. They didn't know a time where digital and mobile working wasn't a thing. And computers really have been a part of their life all the way through. And all of those in between. Now, when we look at it this way, it enables us to think about people in different ways and understand that they have different change needs and different behaviours that you will need to modify as part of your digital transformation. But unfortunately, I think people are building a lot of assumption into the way that people think. We make an assumption that Gen Z, being more digitally native, is more tech savvy. They can solve problems on the fly. They can do things for themselves. And that baby boomers, because they grew up in a time without computers, they're actually resistant to change. They don't really understand technology. A counterpoint to that would be that while Gen Z has grown up with mobile technology, they're far more comfortable in the app space and social media space, whereas baby boomers are brought in with computers coming into the workforce, so they far more understand how computers can influence their work environments, and they've had to learn in the business on how computers can help them do their job. So actually, I think there's different facets to this, but taking that generational approach, I think, is a problem. Because one of the other things we see is organisations that recognise that Gen Z and the millennial are the workforce of the future, and now we're starting to see almost a balancing where there's as many Gen Z and millennials in the workforce as there are baby boomers as the boomers start to retire. But actually organisations are designing things for this future generation and ignoring the needs of. And I think for the workforce of the future, this generational requirement is going to be ongoing. It's not going to go away. So organisations need to think differently about how they bring their entire workforce forward. Now, one of the good ways I think you can start to think about this is to take an activity-based approach. In my previous talks, I've talked about how rather than taking a location-based approach, working from home or working in the office, you can use activity-based approach to design different workspaces for the different activities to optimize. In the same way, you can look at that from a people perspective, because different people fulfilling different roles have different space needs and they have different behaviors. So when we look at it this way and we analyze the different behaviors, what we tend to find is there are three distinct groups. You've got the soloist. The soloist is a knowledge worker. They tend to spend the majority of their time at their desk or at a particular location, concentrating. They like focus. A lot of time you'll see these people with headphones on and things like that as well. So they can actually apply 100% of their focus to the activity at a time, and they spend majority of their day in this sort of work environment. In software development, you'll see developers in that sort of environment quite often. You'll see data analysts, you see researchers, you see analysts in general, and policy workers in that sort of environment where they're concentrating on a particular topic. Another different work style though is the mixed work style, where you will have people, they work at a desk because they still have a need for that quiet time, but they spend a majority of their time collaborating with others away from their desk. It's a mixed style because it's a combination of that focus work and collaborative work. Here you would look at managers. In software development you would look at business analysts and designers and those sorts of people that are focused on a particular activity, but they're working with others quite often away from their desks, but again within a defined location. And then we've got the hybrid mixed work style that's a combination of them all, but they spend the majority of their time not at a desk. They spend it out mobile, either in other organisations, mobile within their own organisation, but they don't really have a home base in any way, shape or form. Here you would look at perhaps consultants in this sort of work style. You would look at salespeople and those other sort of mobile workers where you expect them to be out talking to other people predominantly, and may come back to the desk for a small period to do administrative functions, but their work environment is away from the organisation. Now, understanding people and the roles that they carry out, what you actually find is that the majority of people fulfilling these roles all behave in the same way. The majority of software developers like to be able to focus. They like to be in one location where they can be free of distraction. The majority of managers, I won't say like to be in meetings, but they like to be talking to others. They like to be collaborating. And so looking at types of role gives us a far better method of looking at interventions as a group than it does generational. Because I think with any generational model, you will have some people that will fall into the stereotype and you will have a lot of people that won't. So taking a generational model actually isn't helpful and it's quite divisive. Looking at it from a role though, I think it enables you to look at the type of behaviours you expect to see in a role and then designing interventions so that actually all people within that role exhibit similar behaviours. and then can work collaboratively with their peers to reinforce those behaviours. So if we take that as a model, we then start to look at what is the framework that we start to use to drive those behaviours forward. Now, I'm quite a fan of the McKinsey model, the influence model from them. Attribute areas and four key activity areas that organisations can design interventions to enable them to drive the behavioural change that they're looking for. Now, the first of these is about understanding and conviction. And this is top to bottom activity. Does everybody in the organisation understand what you're trying to achieve, the goals you're going for, the new behaviours that you're looking for? And have you actually convinced them that it's the right thing? Now, this goes a lot to leadership as well, because if leaders aren't convinced, they're never going to sell the change and the transformation to their staff. And if staff don't see leaders convinced of the outcomes you're looking for, they're never going to buy into it as well. So this is quite an important aspect. If you don't have this one right, it's very important early on that you look at what are the interventions needed to actually get your staff on board with this change and get the organisation really bought into what you're trying to achieve. A lot of time where you're looking here, it's about communication. If you're seeing staff really aren't convinced of the change, you really haven't established the why properly within their mind, and it's a what's in it for me conversation almost, that you need to go back to and keep reinforcing. This isn't just a case of doing a town hall, it's a constant reinforcement through various mechanisms that you need to embark on here. And that's the second box you go into, the reinforcement mechanisms. What are the activities you're going to do to keep reinforcing with staff that this is the right thing and that the change is actually happening? So it's not just about standing in front of town halls saying we're all on board and we're having a great time doing this transformation. It's actually about the behaviours that you need to show here to reinforce to staff that this is happening and that actually they're on board with this as well. And this might be looking at small activities that you can do, small projects that you can kick off that really start to enable you to communicate the change that you're looking for, the new behaviours you're looking for, and enable staff to see active activity for the transformation you're trying to accomplish. Those activities also go into the third box, which is about building confidence and skills of your employees and their ability to adopt the change. The worst thing you can do is tell people that actually you're expecting something different of them, but then not upskill them and enable them to behave in that different way. So these catalyst activities that you can, small projects that you can embark on, give staff an opportunity to learn through doing, but also be able to communicate to their peers how you do things, what are the benefits, what are the opportunities, and what are the new ways of working that you can bring to the workforce. But one of the fundamental aspects in the fourth box in the model is about role modelling by leaders. I think this is probably the most important. I think a lot of us, we've been in organisations where, yeah, leaders have all said the right words. They've all stood in front of town halls or group meetings and said, this is what we're going to be doing, and we're all on board, and this is vitally important to the organisation, and yeah, that's it. But then their behaviours really don't support that. You know, the type of example you would see often is organisations that say we're going to go digital first, but boards still have everything printed off for them and still work predominantly on paper. These are the behaviours that people pick up on. It's not just about saying the right words, it's actually about exhibiting the behaviour. And I think there's a growing school of thought that actually leaders need to do the change for themselves before they start talking to staff about this, so that staff see that they're fully on board. If you don't do that, you undermine the confidence of staff. There's two things that happen. One, they say they don't really understand the behaviour you're looking for because leaders aren't able to communicate effectively. But also what they see is that the leaders aren't bought into it. So why should they be bought into it? So that role modelling for me is probably the most critical component of everything you can do. And in this activity-based working model, I think that's going to be vitally important. How do leaders exhibit the activity-based behaviours that you're looking for in your staff? So that's four key areas I think you can think about as you start to design your change moving forward. But as I say, behavioural change is a transformational change. And transformational change is difficult, and it takes time, and isn't actually that easy to plan out. So part of this is actually also being agile in your thinking, being able to take feedback from staff, being able to understand progress and how you're going, and adjust your interventions and adjust your activities to optimize your transformational experience. And through that, you will then able to start to move the organization to those behaviors you're looking for. Thank you very much for your attention today. I'm going to be talking more about digital transformation. So if you are interested, subscribe to my channel. And thank you very much.